Deep within the rural landscapes of Nigeria, far away from the blinding neon lights of American stadiums, the echoing roars of 80,000 screaming fans, and the multi-billion-dollar machinery of the National Football League, a young man stood alone in the heat. He wore no pads. He had no molded plastic helmet to protect his jaw, no cleated shoes to grip synthetic turf, and no coach standing over him with a silver whistle and a digital stopwatch. Instead, he had a tree. Day after day, under a blistering sun, he would fire his hands into the rough, unforgiving bark of that tree. He would drop his hips, explode upward, and work on pass-rushing maneuvers designed to bypass offensive linemen he had only ever seen on a glowing phone screen. He did not fully understand the complexities of a dynamic zone blitzing scheme. He did not know the intricate vocabulary of a professional locker room. He didn't even know how to properly fasten the chin strap of an official football helmet. Yet, only months later, inside a high-tech draft war room gripped by intense silence, a group of the most powerful executives in professional sports would look at video footage of this man and see something that defied the laws of physics. They saw a ghost in the machine, an athletic anomaly so terrifyingly gifted that it forced an entire multi-billion-dollar organization to completely discard their traditional scouting manuals. This is not a conventional story about a college football star fulfilling a lifelong dream. This is a psychological and physical thriller about the ultimate gamble in professional sports. A realization of what happens when raw human potential meets a front office that refuses to play by the rules. To understand the sheer madness of what transpired in late April at the NFL Draft in Pittsburgh, one must first understand the clinical, unforgiving nature of modern scouting. Every single year, hundreds of collegiate athletes are measured, timed, weighed, and stripped down to cold data points. Personnel departments spend millions of dollars attempting to minimize risk, looking for safe bets, polished tape, and multi-year starters from powerhouse programs like Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State. Then there is the International Pathway Program. The IPP was created for a singular purpose: to hunt for human anomalies outside the borders of the United States. It is a dragnet cast across the globe to find individuals whose physical traits are so rare that their lack of football knowledge becomes irrelevant. It is a high-risk talent incubator based on a simple, provocative thesis. You can teach a world-class athlete how to play football, but you cannot teach a football player how to be a world-class athlete. When scouts first laid eyes on Yuri Bernard during the International Pathway Program showcase, the collective intake of breath in the scouting community was audible. On paper, human beings built like Bernard are not supposed to move the way he does. The NFL uses a standardized metric known as the Relative Athletic Score, RAS, to grade an athlete's physical capabilities on a strict scale from 0 to 10. A score of 5, 0 is average. A score of 8, 0 is exceptional. A score of 9, 0 is elite. Yuri Bernard recorded a relative athletic score of 9. 9. Out of thousands of defensive linemen who have entered the NFL over the past several decades, Bernard's physical profile placed him in the upper echelon of the top 1% of athletes to ever exist on Earth. The numbers coming out of his testing drills read like a fictional sports movie script. Height, 6 feet, 4 inches weight, 306 pounds bench press, 31 repetitions of 225 pounds vertical jump, 39 inches broad jump, 10 feet, 10 inches 40-yard dash, 63 seconds to the casual observer. These are just numbers on a spreadsheet. To an NFL defensive line coach, they are terrifying. A 306-pound human being should not be able to propel his center of mass nearly 40 inches into the air from a dead stop. A man weighing over 300 pounds should not be able to cover 40 yards of turf in 63 seconds, a time typically reserved for flying wide receivers and agile defensive backs who weigh 100 pounds less than him. But as the data traveled from the showcase to the computers of front offices across the league, a massive red flag began to wave alongside the historic testing numbers. When talent evaluators began to watch the lateral agility drills, the narrative around Bernard took a sharp, problematic turn. Football is rarely a game played in a straight line. It is a violent ballet of sudden stops, lateral shifts, and instantaneous changes of direction. While Bernard possessed the straight-line speed of a runaway freight train and the vertical explosion of a ballistic missile, his short-area quickness was a massive liability. His performance in the 20-yard shuttle and the three-cone drill, the two ultimate tests of an athlete's east-west mobility and lateral flexibility, was undeniably slow. His hips appeared rigid. His transitions were clunky. He was a developmental paradox, an unstoppable force in a linear direction, but completely lost when forced to bend around an edge. The league became deeply divided. To some teams, Bernard was a mirage, a track and field athlete trying to play a collision sport where raw speed means nothing if you don't know how to anchor against a double team or diagnose an inside zone run. He was so green, so utterly raw, that during his initial introduction to the sport, he literally required physical assistance just to strap on his helmet properly. The concept of an NFL playbook, a document dense enough to rival a corporate legal text, seemed a universe away from a young man who had spent his formative years hitting a tree trunk in Nigeria. The ultimate benchmarks to put his staggering linear metrics into perspective, scouts immediately drew a historical comparison that shocked the football world. They lined his numbers up directly against one of the most destructive defensive forces of the modern era, Myles Garrett, the former #1 overall draft pick and multi-time All-Pro. Athletic metric year Bernard Myles Garrett height 6 feet 4 inches, 6 feet 4 inches, weight 306 pounds, 272 pounds, 40-yard dash 4. 63 seconds 4. 64 seconds bench press, 225 pounds, 31 reps, 33 reps vertical, jump 39. 0 inches 41. 0 inches broad jump 10 feet, 10 inches 10 feet, 8 inches. Look closely at the data. Myles Garrett weighed 272 pounds when he entered the league as a generational, elite prospect. Bernard ran a faster 40-yard dash than Garrett despite carrying an extra 34 pounds of muscle. Bernard outjumped Garrett in the broad jump by 2 clear inches. Yet, Garrett was a polished, hyperdominant college superstar who had spent his entire life mastering the nuances of the edge rush position. Bernard had zero film. He had zero game experience. He had never lined up in a three-point stance with a 320-pound offensive guard staring down his throat, ready to break his fingers. The question consuming the league was simple. Would any front office have the courage, the patience, and the structural stability to draft a man who didn't know how to play the game? On the morning of the third and final day of the 2026 NFL Draft in Pittsburgh, the atmosphere inside the Philadelphia Eagles draft room was heavy with exhaustion and caffeine. For 2 days, General Manager Howie Roseman and team owner Jeffrey Lurie had engineered trades, navigated board changes, and accumulated talent. But day 3 is where championships are quietly manufactured. It is the territory of late-round flyers, special team specialists, and hidden gems. Before the selection clock began ticking on that decisive morning, the Eagles held their sacred annual ritual, the Passion Meeting. The Passion Meeting is a unique, highly collaborative organizational tradition designed by Philadelphia's leadership. It is a moment where the traditional corporate hierarchy of an NFL front office is temporarily dissolved. The scouts who have spent months living out of suitcases in cheap hotels, and the position coaches who must ultimately train these young men on the grass, are given the floor. They are invited to step to the front of the room, look the general manager and owner in the eye, and put their professional reputations on the line for a single player they passionately believe in. As the room fell quiet, Clint Hurt, the Eagles' highly respected defensive line coach operating under defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, stood in the back corner. Hurt is an old-school, no-nonsense football mind. He does not get swayed by flashy internet highlights or empty hype. He values grit, violence at the point of attack, and unyielding character. Hurt walked to the front of the room, turned to Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, and delivered a fiery endorsement that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the draft board. I understand he hasn't played, but this guy's got more talent in his body physically than some of the guys that got drafted in the first 2 days. I trust myself, and I believe in this kid. It was a profound, striking statement. Hurt was telling his bosses that a raw international prospect for Nigeria possessed a higher physical ceiling than elite college football players who had just been selected in the second and third rounds on national television. Hurt wasn't just guessing. He was relying on an intimate, secret pre-draft interaction that had occurred weeks prior, a moment that proved Bernard possessed the psychological makeup required to survive the meat grinder of the NFL. Before the draft, 12 separate NFL franchises had scheduled private visits and workouts with Bernard. They wanted to see if the testing numbers were real, and more importantly, they wanted to see how he responded to the Eagles had scheduled their private workout
it really dictates the defense
exactly 9 a.m. on a crisp spring morning. Clint Hurt arrived at the facility early, expecting to grab a coffee and review his notes. When Hurt walked out to the field at 7:45 a.m., a full hour and 15 minutes ahead of schedule, he stopped dead in his tracks. There was Bernard. He was already out on the grass, entirely alone, completely drenched in a heavy, full-body sweat. He hadn't just been stretching. He had been putting himself through a self-guided, high-intensity workout in the morning mist, desperate to ensure he was fully prepared for the moment his coach arrived. Scheduled workout, 9 a.m. 7:45 a.m. Bernard arrives early, in full sweat. 9 a.m. actual evaluation begins. The football world laughed at the pick. Critics claimed it was a waste of resources, a publicity stunt, or an arrogant attempt to prove the front office was smarter than everyone else. But Philadelphia didn't listen. They handed Mailata over to legendary offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland, poured years of developmental resources into him, protected him on a roster, and waited. Today, Jordan Mailata is not just a starting offensive tackle in the NFL. He is a multimillionaire, an all-pro caliber anchor, and widely considered one of the most dominant left tackles on the planet. When Bernard walked into the Eagles' training facility for the first time as a drafted rookie, the media instantly rushed to Mailata to ask him if he saw the similarities, if he believed this wild experiment could actually work a second time, this time on the defensive side of the ball. Mailata didn't hesitate. He looked directly at the reporters, shook his head in sheer disbelief, and issued a chilling assessment of his new teammate. "You is a freak. He is also not of this planet. He's just freakishly strong, freakishly fast. Metric and numbers-wise, you see his effort on film. Once he puts it all together, I think it's a wrap." When an all-pro offensive lineman who weighs 365 pounds tells the world that a rookie is not of this planet, the rest of the NFL should probably pay very close attention. What makes this draft selection an incredibly brilliant masterstroke by Howie Roseman isn't just the physical upside of the player. It is the strategic manipulation of the NFL's roster rules. In the modern NFL, roster spots are the most valuable currency an organization possesses. Teams are strictly limited to a 53-man active roster and a highly competitive practice squad. Usually, stash prospects, players who need years of development before they can step onto a regular season field, are an immense luxury because they consume a valuable practice squad spot that could otherwise be used on an injury replacement or a special teams contributor. Because Bernard entered the professional ranks via the International Pathway Program, the Eagles are granted a highly lucrative, entirely free systemic exemption. Under current NFL rules, teams are permitted an additional 17 spot on their practice squad specifically designated for an international pathway player. Roster cost, absolutely zero. Practice squad flexibility, 100% maintained. The benefit, an extra elite physical body in training camp to absorb reps and push veteran players. Bernard does not count against Philadelphia's traditional practice squad limits. The Eagles can keep him in their building, under the direct daily supervision of Clint Hurt and Vic Fangio, for an entire year without sacrificing a single roster spot for another player. They can feed him, train him, teach him the language of the sport, and allow him to adjust to American culture with completely zero external pressure to produce immediately on Sundays. It is a completely risk-free, high-reward investment. If Bernard busts, the Eagles lose a late 7th-round pick, an asset that historically has a less than 10% chance of ever becoming a meaningful contributor in the league. But if he hits, If Clint Hurt can successfully mold that historic 9 RAS physical frame into a functional, technically sound defensive tackle, the Eagles will have acquired a multi-million-dollar disruptive defensive force for the absolute minimum price imaginable. As the NFL calendar edges closer to the heat of late summer and the start of the preseason, all eyes inside the Philadelphia organization will quietly be tracking the development of jersey number 93. The transition will not be seamless. There will be moments in early preseason games where Bernard gets washed out by his zone blocking scheme. There will be snaps where his lack of lateral quickness exposes him to savvier, highly experienced NFL guards who know how to use an opponent's forward momentum against him. He will make mistakes that make fans yell in frustration, and he will look every bit like a man who was hitting a tree in Nigeria just months ago. But then there will be a flash. There will be a play late in a preseason game where the ball is snapped, and Bernard will utilize that terrifying 4.63 straight line speed. He will fire his hands into the chest of an opposing center with the raw, unadulterated power of 31 bench press reps. He will collapse the pocket like a falling building, and he will leave an opposing quarterback flat on his back in the turf. And in that singular electric moment, the entire football world will look at the Philadelphia Eagles sideline, look back at the historic numbers on the scouting report, and realize that the mad scientists of the NFL front office might have just done it again. The gamble has officially begun. The raw physical clay has been delivered to Philadelphia. Now, the world simply waits to see what kind of monster Clint Hurt is going to sculpt out of it.